Hey everybody, this is just a quick sorta tutorial on how to get VirtualBox up and running so that you can either install another copy of Windows, or if you want to try out a version of Linux, pretty much any of the versions of Linux, without installing it onto your machine. How to do that in a virtual machine. And in this one I'm using VirtualBox. And specifically I'm doing this because I've got a version of Linux that I put together for education called EdUBudgie. I've made some videos on it. So this is how to kind of test that if you're interested. But you could use it for Ubuntu, for Red Hat, for a whole bunch of different versions of Linux, for different versions of Windows. You can even do it with Mac, though I'm not going to get into any of that. So, the first thing you need to do is to download VirtualBox, and that's this right here. And if you do VirtualBox download, you'll come up with either this or this. These are the old versions, these are the new ones. What I like to do actually is to search for VirtualBox download FTP and go to this site here, which gives you this. The reason is this gives you old builds, and in my opinion it doesn't look as nice, but it's more well organized. And then come down to the newest, or one of the newest builds. Now I'm using, let's see, version 6.0.4. And the reason I'm using that is it works well with another program that I have called Genymotion. I'm not going to get into that. You would probably want to use the newest version. So if we choose one of these 6.1 versions, let's just go with 6.1.10. There are others. This is not all the way down, notice, because when you get down here you get into betas and release candidates. But let's just pick on this one. There's three things that you need to download. You need to get the actual program, the extension pack, and the guest editions CD. So for the actual program, it would depend. If you're running Linux, you would use one of these or one of these. If you're running Windows, let's see, here's one for Mac, OS 10, and here's a Windows one. Is it the only Windows one? It looks like it, win.exe. So you would download VirtualBox, and then also get, and you see it's this 138449, I think that's the build number. You'll also get this extension pack, so those two things, and then you'll also want this guest editions ISO. So basically VirtualBox is the program, the extension pack opens up some functionality, and I'll show you how to install that in a moment. And then the guest editions, you actually install into the operating system that you're running in the virtual machine. And that's like some drivers and stuff. So download this one for Windows first and install it. And you'll have basically this right here. Again, this is an older version. Once you've got that downloaded and installed, and you've installed the extension pack and the guest editions, the next thing you want to do is to add the extension pack. So you'll come to, let's see, File Preferences, and come down here to Extensions, and then you want to click plus and add the extension pack. Now you notice mine is listed here, and it shows that there's a problem because I'm using the wrong version extension pack with this version of VirtualBox. It still works in this case pretty well, but you want to make sure to get the correct one. Again, mine's running 6.1 even though I've got 6.04, which actually, let's see, which specific one do I have? 604, 128, 413. Six oh four. 128, 413, okay. All right, so I've got that. So, let's see if I can add it. Extensions, let me remove that, remove, and then we'll add. Mine's on my desktop. There we go, that's the extension pack, open. Yep, install. You got to scroll down, do I agree? Installed successfully. Okay, so now mine's not giving an error. So again, make sure that the version matches up with the version of the program that you got. And it's good to fix that. So now the next thing that you need is what you're going to actually run in the virtual machine. So like for instance, if you go to edubudgie.com, that's my version of Linux. You can come over here to download, and you can download this. Click the download button. Now I've already got it right here. That's the extension pack, by the way. I've already got EdUBudgie right here, so I won't download it. That's an option you can always choose to go with. You can always download a different one. Now, my version of Linux is based on Ubuntu. It uses the same installer. Most of the other Ubuntu-based ones use the same installer. So I think Linux Mint is really close to the typical Ubuntu installer. EdUBudgie is another one that'll work. Kubuntu, Lubuntu, Xubuntu, there's a whole bunch that are based on that'll work. I think Zorin OS is basically the same, but others can install as well. So like if you wanted to try out Red Hat, for instance, or CentOS, or one based on that, it should still install, and setting up the virtual machine will be the same, or should be the same. What will be different is the actual installation once you open the disk up and start to run it. But at any rate, if this is your first time installing Linux, you could try Ubuntu, or you could try, again, EdUBudgie. That's mine. It's for education, it's for students and teachers, but it installs the same way as Ubuntu. So you could do that, or do this, accept, and then just download. And what you want to download is the 64-bit version, which, let's see here. Here they're trying to get you to pay, but yeah, there we go. So it's downloading the regular AMD 64-bit version. I'm going to cancel it because I've already got that somewhere. All right, let's close out of these here. And again, I'll keep this up just so that you can see. That's where you go to download VirtualBox. And you've got to get VirtualBox, the extension pack, and the guest editions, regardless of which version you choose to go with. So like if you're going with 6.1.18, you would get 6.1.18 WinExe, assuming you're using Windows, or OS 10.dmg, or if you're on Linux, you would get the correct one. And get this extension pack, 142.142, it matches, and get this VBox Guest Editions disc as well. Which actually, I don't think I have the guest editions for 6.0.4. Let me download that. Yeah, and I'll just put that on my desktop as well. So you've installed it, you've put the extension pack in, now it's time to create the actual virtual machine. So you can see I've got a couple things here. Ignore those. Those are other virtual machines that I have, and yeah, I've installed EdUBudgie once, but I'll do it again. So to create a new one, you want to have the ISO somewhere where you know where it is for the installation. After you've installed the operating system, you can remove it or delete it or move it, but just put it on the desktop for now, just to be safe. Okay, guest editions are done. That's good. And then you'll click New here, and name. I'm going to call mine EdUBudgie Linux. It'll give you a default folder that it puts it in. I've changed the default in mine, but I think it puts it into your user folder in Windows normally. And then it will try to guess the type. Now, it shows Linux, which is correct, but it's choosing the wrong version. It's choosing a generic 64-bit. But actually, EdUBudgie Linux is based on Ubuntu, so I'm going to come down here and choose Ubuntu 64-bit, okay? And then next. And then it's asking you how much memory you want. And that depends on how much you've got. If you've got 8 gigabytes of memory and you're only going to run one virtual machine, go with 4 and try it out. I've got way more memory on my system, so I'll go with 4 anyways. So note that this is in megabytes. If you're not sure, you can do 4 gigabytes to megabytes. And actually, let's see, 4 is 4,000s. But you want to do gigabit to megabit. This is the difference between a base 10 number system and base 10 number system versus, what is it, binary number system, I think? That's why it's 4096 instead of 4000. So I'll choose 4096 for this. And that'll give you 4 gigs of memory. I would say for Ubuntu or most of the current Linux ones, you want at least 2 gigabytes, and the more the better. I would say really you want at least 4 gigabytes if you can, but at least 2 will get you going. It'll be slow, but it'll get you going. Now it's going to ask you to make a hard disk. Again, I'm just doing this the easy way. There's several ways of doing this, but let's just create a hard disk. VDI is fine, that's the hard disk format. And then how do you want to allocate it? And basically this gives you the info. If it's dynamically allocated, it takes up less space initially, but as you fill it up, it'll take up more space, versus a fixed size where it takes up all the space at the beginning. But it's a little bit quicker once you actually get things installed. The operating system in the virtual machine will run a bit quicker. I'm going to choose dynamically allocated because it saves disk space, and because I don't really care for this one. If you choose fixed size, it takes a little bit longer in this step to create the actual hard drive file that is going to be installed on. So I'm going to choose dynamic. And for a size, if you're running Windows, I would say at least 64 gigabytes. If you're running Linux, I would say at least 32. If you're running Mac, I would say at least 64. And beyond that, go to whatever size you can fit. If you've got a terabyte drive and you've got 500 gigabytes of space, you might want to go for 200 gigabytes just to try it out. You can always delete the virtual machine and reclaim that space later. And there is a way to expand the size later, but it's a command line thing you don't want to get into. So try to try to make it as large as you think you're going to need without going grossly over. And you'll want to have a little bit of extra space in the end for saving files and things like that if you really enjoy it. So I'm just going to say 40 gigabytes. Since I'm installing Linux, I know that's going to be enough for all of my programs and everything, and I've got plenty of space, so that's good. Create. All right, so now I've got the virtual machine, but you've got to change some of the settings. And for Ubuntu or for EdUBudgie, again, if you want to download mine, do it. And it would be wonderful if you used the MediaFire link, because then I can see how many downloads there are. But really, any of the downloads would work. They're all slow, but hey, it's a free software, free operating system, so you're welcome. But at any rate, we got to change some of the settings. So let's click here, and I'll show you what I would normally go with. So leave these things as they are. Under advanced, I'll normally change this to bidirectional and this to bidirectional. Reason being, what it does is if I, for instance, copy text in my main Windows host system, I can then paste it inside of the virtual machine. That said, there are some security issues where, like if you have a virus in your main system, you might be able to put it into the virtual machine and vice versa. So if you're doing something for security reasons, you might want to leave those disabled. And then drag and drop is the same thing for files. And then leave the snapshot folder. I'm not changing the description. You can add one if you like. And I don't do disk encryption because I don't personally care. It's not a security concern for me, so I'm leaving it. This would probably add a bit of overhead. It might make the system a little bit slower, but probably not a big deal. Down here in System, you can see the memory selected. I'm going to uncheck floppy because I don't need it, but I do want an optical disk and a hard disk. Optical disk is what you'll use for this install ISO, and we'll get to that in a minute. And then hard drive, obviously, you need. Leave these as they are. They tend to work well, for Linux at least. Sometimes you'll have to do enable EFI for certain operating systems, but just leave them as they are for now. Now for processor, I would normally enable this. If you have nested VTX available, enable it, and then choose the number of processing cores that you can and that you think are going to be suitable. So if you've got let's say you've got a 4-core Core i5, 4 cores, 4 threads. I would choose 2. If you've got a 6-core, 12-thread Core i7, choose 4, maybe 6. If you've got, let's say like a 16-core, 32-thread Ryzen 7, you could, I don't know, you could go with 8 if you wanted to. You really probably aren't going to need that many if you're just using this as a trial, but you can go to as many as you like. Now, the reason that you see this is green and this is tan is my system has 12 threads, 12 cores, but 24 threads. So half of these are physical cores, which run at 100%. Half of them are threads, which give you a bit less performance, maybe 70% performance. So I'm going to go with, let's just go with 4 CPUs for now. Again, your maximum here is going to be the maximum number of CPU threads that your system has. It won't be 24 unless you have a 12-core, 24-thread processor. I've got 2 6-core 12 threads, and so 24 total. And then for acceleration, I would leave these checked and leave it at default. For display, what you'll want to do is crank video memory all the way up. And then because of glitchiness, I usually leave these unchecked and leave it on VMSVGA. Now, sometimes you'll find that other options here under graphics controller work better. And for instance, if I check 3D, no, not on Linux. If I check 3D on a Windows virtual machine, you'll see this can actually go up to 256. I would leave 2D and 3D unchecked. It seems to be the most reliable and stable for me with my system. You might try them checked. Note that for me, if I check 2D, it shows invalid. Not sure why that is. Something with my video card. But 3D I can enable. I'm just not going to. For storage, you see I've got the hard drive there, and then for IDE it says empty. Now I can choose this disk here by selecting it, but I'm not going to yet. You can choose to if you want to, but I'm going to leave it for now. Audio, I'll leave the way it is. It's enabled. It's just a basic Windows audio. For network, you can choose to do NAT, Network Address Translation. What that does is it creates sort of a sub-network within your local computer that does not allow you to connect to other computers on your network. I want mine, though, to be able to see the rest of my network transparently. So I'm going to choose bridged, and then this is my default bridged adapter, my default adapter in this machine. This will allow me to get an IP address from my regular router and to act like this is another actual operating system on my normal network. So I'll be able to connect to this from another computer if I like to. If I choose NAT, I wouldn't be able to. So I like to use bridged. NAT is a little bit safer, and for just testing, NAT should be fine. Serial ports and USB, leave them how they are. Shared folders, I don't add any shared folders personally, and user interface I keep the same. So do OK, and then double click it. And now, if you did not choose the CD, the startup disk is going to ask you for one. So here is where I'll choose EdUBudgie, and I'm going to, I have it in a different folder, but I'll come here to desktop and choose it, open, and then start. And then, now it's starting the actual virtual machine. And this takes some time, but I'll get you through the settings. Yeah, we're at 18 minutes. I'll go through the settings anyways of how to install this. Hopefully that will not check the whole thing. I always forget to do that. This is just checking the disk for integrity, for file system integrity. There's a lot of stuff that I'm not going over, that I'm skipping over. This is just a really pretty basic, not very well customized example, but it's an example of one way to get things going and to run Ubuntu Linux, or EdUBudgie in my case, or another Ubuntu variant. Again, Red Hat will be a little bit different. Arch would be quite a bit different. You can install Windows this way, although arguably there's also a Windows sandbox. There's also a Hyper-V that might be better, but you can install Windows into here. You could install, I used to have an installation of Windows 10, Windows 7, Windows XP, and I think Windows 98 as well. just in case I ever ran into software that I needed to run on any of those systems. Right now, I've got EdUBudgie Linux, my software, which I have installed in here for testing, and that's what I'm using for the example. And then I have an Android device as well that is part of Genymotion. That one's a little bit different, so I won't get into that, but I don't use this a ton, but I use it for testing. At any rate, if you're running Ubuntu or EdUBudgie, you'll get to this screen, and you can try EdUBudgie, but it may ask you for a password. I'm going to go to install, because that's what we want to do. That's what this video is for. Install EdUBudgie. I'm choosing, that's your keyboard. I'm going with the default. Here I'm going to do normal, download updates, and check install third-party software. Again, if you have a reason to choose something different, go ahead and do it. And if you already know about it, then and you just came here to see how VirtualBox needed to be set up, we're done with that. Now it's just a regular Linux Ubuntu install or EdUBudgie install at this point. But I wanted to go through it anyways. So continue. I'm going to do erase disk and install EdUBudgie. Now, it's important to know, this is not erasing the C disk or anything. What this will do, actually, right here is the virtual disk file, and it will, you'll see if you kept this window open that file will get larger and larger as your operating system is installed into the virtual machine. So this will erase the entire disk, but it's erasing the disk that I made for EdUBudgie Linux that is blank right now. So it's not going to hurt anything. Now, if this were a real installation and you went to erase the entire disk, it would delete everything on it. Since it's a virtual machine, I'm not worried, I don't really care. I made this disk file specifically for this. So install, it's going to ask me to confirm it. Yep, continue. You can just go with the defaults. Now I'm going to choose my time zone, and you can choose, there's a bunch of cities listed here. They don't have Syracuse, but they've got Toronto or New York. But if you're in Novosibirsk, you can choose that time zone. Going with this tempo. Now it's going to ask me for my name. This is my real name. Adam is the best. I have two middle names. And then you can choose a computer name. So I'm just going to go with that. EdUBudgie Linux VirtualBox test. Now my username that I used to log in, we'll go with Adam. Choose a password. I'm going with, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There we are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And it asks you to type it in there twice to check it, of course. You can select this if you want it to log in automatically, or do require my password, and then continue. And at this point, it is installing. So I've got most of this on another video about how to install EdUBudgie. The main point of this video was VirtualBox, how to get it up and running in VirtualBox. Now the important thing to think about, to consider here is, what do you want to do for base memory and processors? So for instance, I can show you, let's see. So I've got two Xeon X5660s. That gives me 12 cores and 24 threads. And you can see I've got 48 gigs of memory, right? And then for hard drive space, I've got, I don't know, a terabyte or something. So, so those are the three things: memory, processor, number of processor cores, and how much hard drive space do you want to use. It's going to totally depend on what your system is. Again, if you've got like a Ryzen 5 with 6 cores and 12 threads, I think, for like, was that like the Ryzen 5 2600 or whatever, 3600, 1600, I think there were 6 core 12 threads. You might want to use 6 cores, you might want to only use 4. You can try it with 2 or even 1. It'll work, it'll just run slowly. But what you can see here is that a couple of these cores are being used quite a bit. And you can probably guess that probably like maybe these four, or maybe this one, and a couple of these, are the four being used to actually install Linux. Although I'm recording this screen and stuff. If you've only got a dual core processor and no hyperthreading, if there's only 2 cores, you can only use 1. You're not going to want to use 2. That would be an awfully slow system. So play around with it though. Worst case scenario, you can always delete the virtual machine and make a new one. Similar idea with memory. So I've got 48 gigs. I can easily use, I could probably get away with running 44 gigs for this virtual machine, but it wouldn't make sense. I've got no reason to do that. 4 gigs is a good starting point if you've got at least 8 gigs of memory. Try your virtual machine on that. If it doesn't work, go lower, go higher, whatever. Probably 4 or 8 gigs for running just a trial of any version of Linux would be fine if you're new to this. If you've got a specific thing in mind that you want to do, of course, then do that. Then you probably don't need to be watching this, but 4 or 8 gigs is what I would target. Again, you could get away with probably 2 cores and 2 gigs of memory, but it would be slow and tedious. And you could probably do 1 core, and I don't know that Ubuntu would run on 1 gig of memory, but you could try it. But it would be tough. Video memory, again, just max it out. It'll either be 128 or 256 megabyte. And I would not do 2D or 3D, but that's up to you. And then for hard drive size, now I just happen to know that EdUBudgie takes up about 20 gigabytes of space. I'm doubling that to have extra room for documents and other things. Regular Ubuntu, I think, only uses about 12 gigabytes of space, if I'm not mistaken. So you could get away with, a 20 gigabyte drive and still have some room for documents and stuff. But again, remember, this is all reclaimable. So that 40 gigabytes, if I were to look at the actual file size right now, this will be getting larger, but yeah, you see it's at 15 gigabytes right now. As it's copying files and it's installing itself, it'll end up being somewhere around 18 or 20. But that is reclaimable. If I delete this virtual machine, it'll remove all of this. So if you're just testing, it's not a big deal. Say you're testing Ubuntu or Linux or whatever, Windows, and you've got 100 gigabytes of free space, give it 80 or 90. That's probably fine. And then just delete it when you're done with it, So that's really mostly it for a quick and easy and dirty way to set up VirtualBox on your machine and to test out a copy of Linux or even a different operating system, Windows or FreeBSD or whatever else. There are lots of caveats that I'm not going to get into. This was just a quick, simple, how to do it to test out one of these if you've never tried it before in a virtual machine without worrying about messing up your actual physical system at all. So hopefully this helps some folks. We're at a half an hour. That's way too damn long for a video. So have a great day. Good luck. Leave a comment if you need something. Please download my software and try it out. Let me know what you think. By the way, when this is done, it will ask you to remove the CD, but if you look down here, that shows that there is a disk in the drive. Again, it's this virtual disk in this virtual drive. When it asks you to remove it, you'll notice that this has been grayed out and the disk is already gone. And then it says hit enter. So you hit enter, it'll reboot, and that would take you into EdUBudgie, at which point you would then right-click and do choose disk image and choose the guest editions, and then you would install the guest edition software on Linux or Windows or whatever your guest operating system is. I'm not going to get into that today. That's another thing. The main thing was getting you at least set up to try one of these out, and I think we got that covered. So have a great day.